last time we started, right, you guys? Last time we started on the issue of meaning, right? The issue of meaning deals with things that may be logically implied, may be not said, but maybe presupposed. That's what we talked about last time, right? And the chapter that deals with meaning is chapter 10, Semantics and Pragmatics, right? Last time we looked at the case of entailment and the case of presupposition. You guys remember that, right? So the case of entailment, remember, entailment has to do with logical meaning, right? Basically, if sentence A entails B, it means that B has to be true. It means that B, sentence B, necessarily follows from A, from sentence A, right? For example, if sentence A is the president got killed, right? The president got killed, okay? And sentence B is the president died, right? We can say that A, sentence A, entails sentence B, right? So A entails B. Why is that? Because the validity of B, the fact that the president died, is necessarily, right? Is a necessarily result of saying A, right? It's a necessarily true. It's necessarily true, right? Because when someone got killed, he cannot be alive, right? So killed includes the meaning of died in here, right? But it doesn't mean that B entails A. B, in this case, does not entail A. Why is that? Because the president died doesn't mean that he got killed, right? He could have died of cancer, for example, without not being killed like that, okay? Entailment is the logical meaning, right? So it's a relationship, logical relationship between two sentences. So it's a logical relationship between two sentences, right? Logical relationship between two sentences, right? So one follows from another, right? One sentence follows from another sentence, logically, like that. So that's the relationship of entailment. That's what we looked at last time. And we also look at the relationship called presupposition, right? Presupposition is different, totally different from entailment, because presupposition has to do with what the speaker or what the writer has in mind, right? What the writer or the speaker has in mind before even speaking that, right? For example, if you have this statement, Krista's TV, right, was stolen. Krista TV was stolen. Here, by saying Krista's TV was stolen, the speaker presupposes, the speaker assumes already, right? The speaker assumes that Krista has a TV. Krista has a TV, like that. Without having to say that, right? Because we call it, and we call it presupposition, right? Something that already exists in the mind of the speaker or of the writer, right? Without having to say it, right? And an interesting characteristic of presupposition is that when you negate the sentence, when you put the word not, when you negate the sentence, negate is to say no, right? When you negate the sentence, the presupposition is still there, okay? If you say Krista's TV was not stolen, let's say was not stolen. Krista's TV was not stolen. Still, the presupposition is Krista's TV. Krista has a TV, right? That presupposition still survives, right? Intact. That presupposition is not affected by the not, right? So this is a presupposition indeed. Right? This is different from the entailment, right? The case of entailment. Because in the case of entailment, if you say the president didn't get killed, then B will change. The relationship of A and B will change, okay? But for presupposition, nothing changes, right? Even though you negate the sentence with not, okay? And there are perhaps two types of presupposition. The first type is existential. Remember, we talked about that last time. Existential presupposition, meaning that if you have a proper name, like Krista, Hanyang University, proper name, or when you have a specific noun phrase, such as the cat, like this, right? The presupposition is that proper noun or that specific noun phrase exists, meaning that there is such a thing, right? Like Krista's TV, that's a proper thing, a specific thing, right? The TV belongs to Krista, so it exists like that, okay? So that's the first type of presupposition, existential presupposition. And the second type of presupposition has to do with other types of wording, like the word again. The word again triggers a presupposition that it has been done before, right? For example, did you fail again? Did you fail the test again? Did you fail again? The word again presupposes, right, that that person failed before, like that. So the word again is a trigger of presupposition, like that. Or the word stop, we look at the word stop, right? The word stop is the same thing. The word stop triggers a presupposition that a condition existed before, right? Did you stop smoking, right? Did you stop smoking? It means that you smoked in the past, like that. So there are many things that can trigger presuppositions, including proper names or specific noun phrases, and also words like again and stop, and so on, okay? And there was a handout from last time. You remember the handout from last time where we practiced analyzing entailment and we practiced analyzing presupposition, which we haven't done, right, for the presupposition. So let's look at that handout and we'll practice presupposition today. There could be more than one presupposition in a particular sentence, right? And to test a presupposition is to negate the sentence, okay? Let's look at number one. We'll go through this quickly. Let's look at number one. James' car is the new 2015 Mercedes C220. you see the specific noun phrase, right? James' car, right? James' car. So one presupposition is James has a car, right? James has a car, right? James has a car. And perhaps also that car is new, right? That car is new, like that. Number 2, let's look at number 2. It's quite surprising that it sometimes rains during the winter. It's quite surprising that it sometimes rains during the winter. What could be a presupposition here? It sometimes rains, right, in the winter. It sometimes rains in the winter, right? It sometimes rains in the winter. If you negate that sentence, for example, it's not surprising. It's not surprising that it rains in the winter. It sometimes rains, right? So sometimes it's here. Even though you negate that, still the presupposition it sometimes rains in the winter survives, right? So the presupposition is it sometimes rains in the winter. Right? Number 3, you can have many presuppositions here, and the easiest one is perhaps the case of proper, right? Proper nouns. So here we have everybody knows Krista is the best professor at Hanyang. So we have Krista exists, right? There's a person by the name of Krista, like that. And Hanyang is a university or is a school, like that. Perhaps university because you see the word professor, right? And let's try to negate the sentence here. Everybody doesn't know or nobody knows. Let's say nobody knows Krista is the best professor at Hanyang. Then what survives is the presupposition, right, that Krista is the best professor at Hanyang. So even though you say nobody knows, right, nobody knows Krista is the best professor at Hanyang, still the presupposition is Krista is the best professor at Hanyang. Okay? So there can be many presuppositions here. I'll have you guys work on number 4 to 7, and I'll ask for volunteers to give me one presupposition for 4 to 7. So let's try your hand on number 4 to number 7. Okay? There could be more than one presupposition, right? The easiest case is the case of proper nouns, right? Proper nouns always exist, and also some specific noun phrases, right? And some words, right? Some words like the word start, for example. The word manage, right? Return, for example. So the first thing for number 4 to 7 that you should notice, the first thing is the use of proper nouns and specific noun phrases, right? For number 4, for example, how kind of Krista to have passed all students in Story of English. Here you have the proper name Krista, right? And the proper name, not the proper name, Story of English, right? So you can say that the presupposition is Krista exists and Story of English exists, right, as a class like that. So you have two there already. The third one that you may notice is all students passed, right? All students passed. Number 5, you have proper nouns as well, Minsu and also Krista's class. So both of these exist. So there exists a person by that name, and there exists a class such as the class that's taught by Krista, like that. And the word start presupposes that the condition is different. So before, he didn't complain, right? Before, he didn't complain, and now he started to do that, meaning that before, the condition was not the same, right? He didn't complain before, like that. Okay. Because the word start presupposes that the situation is different, right? Now, number 6, Hyunho managed to get an A in Krista's class. Now again, you see the word Hyunho, the name, the proper name, and also Krista's class, right? So both of these exist, right? So you have two presuppositions there. And also the word manage. When you use the word manage, it presupposes that a person try, right? A person tries, right? Tries hard. Hyunho didn't manage to get that. Still, it presupposes that when you use the word manage, it presupposes that that person tries, right? So he tried, like that. He attempted to do that, like that. Number 7, Tongmin returned to a single life of freedom and non-commitment. So we have, again, one proper noun here, Tongmin. So a person by that name exists, so that's one presupposition. And another presupposition is the word return, right? So the word return means that you go back to the stage, the condition before, right? So before, he had a single life, right, of freedom and non-commitment, okay? So another presupposition is before, he once had, at least once, had a single life of freedom and non-commitment, like that. So notice that if you negate all of these sentences, the presuppositions that we talked about still remain intact. Tongmin didn't return to a single life for freedom. So meaning that even though you said he didn't return to that single life, so he once, right? He once, when you use the word return, he once had that life before, at least once, like that. Okay, so we look at entailment, we look at presuppositions, right? Now, we already discussed how meaning overlaps and is presupposed, right? In the case of entailment and also presupposition. Now we'll move on to the second topic, which is how context shape meaning. So how meaning can be different depending on the context, right? And that's this topic, right? And before we look at the case of how context shapes meaning, I would like to point out the difference between the word utterance and the word sentence. In syntax, we use the term clause and sentence, right? That's the unit of analysis in syntax. But in pragmatics, when we look at meaning, we use the term utterance instead of sentence, because an utterant, right, which refers to an act of uttering something. Uttering is to say something. An utterance can convey the speaker meaning as well, not only a sentence, not necessarily a sentence, right? So, for example, if A says to B, I'll just decorate the room the way I want, not what you told me. So he doesn't yield, right? He doesn't agree with the way that B wants it to be done. Now B says, fine, like that, fine. Here you see that it's not a sentence, right? It's not a sentence, it's just a word, right? But it conveys the fact that, in reality, fine conveys the fact that B is angry, like that. And perhaps he's saying, fine. When he says fine, it's not fine, right? He doesn't really like the way he say it, right? So fine here is not a sentence, but it's an utterance, we call it. And it has the meaning, right? And it presents B as being sarcastic, like that, or ironic, like that. So an utterance can convey, right? Can convey a lot more than just what it says here, right? So I would like to point out the difference between an utterance and a sentence here. Or if you look at this series of exchanges here, right? Jane, coffee. Steve, sure. Jane White, coffee with milk, like that. Steve Black, coffee without milk. Here, you see no sentence, right? You see no sentences here. Each turn, speaker's turn, each turn is an utterance that convey much more than what you see or what you hear. Coffee here is, would you like to have some coffee, like that, the full sentence. But it's just a noun phrase, maybe, right? It's a noun phrase, just one noun. And then Steve, sure, yes, can you give me, like that. Yes, I would like a cup of coffee, like that. So in analyzing meaning, we look at utterances rather than sentences, okay? Or in this case, two professors met in an elevator at noon. Have you had lunch yet? Professor A asked. B, I've got class at 12:30, right? So maybe on the surface, you might be thinking why B doesn't answer a question, right? Have you had lunch yet? In other situations, we can say, yes, I've had it, or no, I haven't had it, right? But here, I've got class at 12:30. This is different, right? Different than what is asked, literally speaking, right? But B can still convey the hidden meaning, right? That utterance can still convey a hidden meaning that A understands, that A seems to understand. Next time then, so A can interpret B's answer, right? That he cannot join, right? And A's question is not just merely a question as to whether B has had lunch yet or not, but would you like to have lunch with me, like that. And then B, sure, next time let's eat together. Sure, I will do that, like that. So you can see that utterances may convey much more than what you see, right, or what you hear, right? And this is the topic of our class today, how context could shape meaning, okay? Context is very important when we talk about meaning because our language use is dependent upon the context, right? And sometimes you have a case like this where you have no context. Like, let's meet at the bank, right? Without the context, the bank could mean, let's meet at the at one financial institution. Let's meet at the bank so I can transfer the money to you, like that. Or let's meet at the bank so you can enjoy the river view. So bank here is the area around the river, like that. So without the context, let's meet at the bank, it could be interpreted both ways, right? But when the utterance occurs in a context, like let's meet at the bank so I can transfer the money to you, in that context, bank only means a financial institution, right? And in the second context, let's meet at the bank so we can enjoy the river view. It can only mean the area, right, around the river, like that, okay? Or a physical context is also important, right? If you see the word bank on the wall of the building, right, it's most likely to be a financial institution, right? Or in this context, there's your Uncle George, right? And Mary says that man is a snake, right? So snake here doesn't mean Pam, right? Doesn't mean an animal, but it means more than that, right? A man who is not honest, a man who is perhaps a pyeonte, like that, right? In Korean, right? So a psychopath, like that. So in this case, the context, the physical context in which these guys are in, like both know, right? Both know that uncle and so on, right? The physical context help to identify, right, the meaning. Right? Now we'll look at a case. We'll look at a case in linguistics, which is called dexis, right? This is dexis, okay? This is pronounced dexis. So this is a case where meaning really or crucially depends on context, right? To interpret the reference, okay? Some expressions, right? Some expressions are even more uninterpretable than the word bank, right? Without knowing the context, right? The physical context or the context of the text, the word bank could mean two things, right? Could mean, as we said, the financial institution or the area around the river. But some deictic expressions, some expressions are even more uninterpretable, right? More uninterpretable than the word bank itself, right? And these words are what we call dexis or deictic terms, okay? Or deictic expressions. So deictic is an adjective, right? Deictic expressions, deictic terms, right? And the interpretation of these deictic terms depend on who or when or where is picked out to be the reference of the term. And the speaker and the hearer should share the same context in mind. Okay? And we'll look at 4 types of dexis. Okay? We have temporal dexis, demonstratives, spatial dexis, and pronouns. Okay? Again, dexis or deictic terms refer to expressions whose meaning or whose interpretation depends on the context, right? For example, the word today, right? The word today. You know what the word today means, right? But when the word today is uttered in, let's say, when the word today is uttered on a Wednesday, the word today refers to a Wednesday. But if the word today is said on a Tuesday, right, the word today refers to a Tuesday, like that. So you can see that the reference changes every time depending on the day, depending on the temporal context. Temporal has to do with time. Depending on the day on which it's uttered, right? The word tomorrow also depends on the context, depends on the time that is uttered. If the time that is uttered, let's say, if I uttered it today is Monday, right? Let's meet tomorrow, let's say. And today is Monday, tomorrow will refer to a Tuesday. But if I say tomorrow on a Tuesday, right? If I say the word tomorrow on a Tuesday, tomorrow will refer to a Wednesday, for example. So the reference is different. It's different each time, right, that the context shifts in terms of the time, right? And yesterday, now, then, and last, same thing, right? Depending on when you said those words, okay? Or demonstratives, these, that, these, those. The referent changes every time depending on where you utter these words. The word this, right, depending on where. If you are close to the object, you would say this, right? But if you guys are far away, you would call this that marker, right? So this suggests closeness, and that suggests remoteness, like distance, like that. And these and those, same thing, but just plural. And for spatial terms, have to do with space, right? depending on where. Space has to do with location, where you utter these words. Like the word here, if you utter it in this classroom, it refers to the classroom. If you uttered it in, let's say, Hanyang Station, then it would refer to Hanyang Station, like that. Same thing with there, left or right, go and come, bring and take, right? So to go is to move away from the speaker, right? And then to come is to move towards the speaker, like that, or the listener, like that. Pronouns also, depending on who. If I, Krista, says I, then I refers to Krista. But if Minsu or if other people use I, the I refers to Minsu and other people, right? So the reference changes every time. The reference changes every time the situation changes, right? The situation of time, the situation of closeness or distance, the situation of location, and the situation of who, person, right? So as you can see in these examples, right? I stopped believing in Santa Claus when my mother took me to see him in a department store, like that. So I here, depending on who said it, right? So I would refer to different people, depending on who said it. And then my mother, different, right? Different mother each time that a different person utters that sentence, right? And same thing goes for free soju tomorrow. It depends on what day it's uttered. If it's uttered on Monday, the soju will be given on a Tuesday. If it's uttered on a Tuesday, the soju will be given on a Wednesday, like that, right? I'm going to London, I'm coming to London, same thing. I'm going to London, perhaps nobody lives in London that he knows, that the speaker knows, but I'm coming to London. Perhaps there's a person, a friend, that a speaker is saying that to, right? So come here suggests the motion toward the listener, like that. Okay. How long ago did the last bus leave? Here, the word last is deictic because it refers to the last one before he said that sentence. Like perhaps 5 minutes ago before he said that sentence, right? So this one is deictic because it's different depending on when he asked that question. But when you say the last bus leaves at 11:30, the last bus leaves at 11:30, that one is not deictic, okay? So make sure that you can distinguish between these two cases. The last bus leaves at 11:30. The last bus there has only one reference that doesn't change no matter when the sentence is uttered, right? Always the timetable is that the last bus will leave at that time. Doesn't matter when you say it. The last bus will always leave at that time, right? Just like the last train, last subway, right? The last subway would operate at that time, for example, right, in a day. So perhaps the word last could be used deictically or non-deictically as well. So last in the first sentence is deictic, but in the second one it's not deictic because the reference stays the same. Okay, I forgot to mention that all of these words, today, tomorrow, yesterday, now, then, and last, and also demonstratives and special terms, they can also be used non-deictically. Okay, so while most of the time they are used deictically, right? They are deictic terms. There are some exception cases where they are used non-deictically, such as this one. The last bus leaves at 11:30, like that. Okay. Or in the case of the word then, let's look at the word then. Okay. So first, let's see. First, I will talk about X. Then I will discuss Y. Okay, so you see the word then there. Okay. And the second case, let's see. I was born, let's say I was born in 1999. right? There was no, let's say, there was no cell phone, the thing called cell phone, then, let's suppose that. Right? If you look at these two cases, the first one is non-dictic, right? Because when you say first and then, here then means only the word next, right? Next, right? 다음에, like that in Korean, right? So the word then there is non-dictic, right? Because it always means that, and it doesn't refer to anything, right? But here in the second one, I was born in 1999. There was no cell phone then. The word then refers to 1999, right? And if 1999 is not 1999, if that person was born in 1989, the word then would change the referent to 1989, like that. Okay? So all these terms can be, right, can be used non-dictically, but most of the time they are dictic terms, or they are used dictically. Okay? And note that it's not that the word meaning of these, it's not that the word meaning, the literal meaning of these dictic terms changes. For example, here always has the meaning of in this place or in this spot. But what we are talking about here is that the referent, okay, the referent changes every time. The meaning is the same, but the referent changes every time that the context changes. For example, the speaker and the hearer, or the time in which the time at which that utterance is uttered. Right? So we are now looking at dictic, right? And when we talk about dictic terms, when we're talking about dictic terms, there is what we call the dictic center. You know, the dictic center, right? The dictic center. The dictic center. Dictic center. The dictic center has to do with, let's see, the assumption, right? The usual assumption that we take when we make utterances. So we usually think of ourselves first, right? So we have ourself, meaning that the speaker is the dictic center, right? The speaker is the dictic center, right? So in other words, when you say I, right? When you say I always refer to the speaker. That's because the speaker self, right? The speaker himself or herself is the center of the dictic, right? And other people are defined in relation to that center, right? That's why when another person says I, it refers to the speaker, that person, okay? It's because the speaker is always the dictic center. That's the assumption that we all make, okay? And the center of time is the time of utterance. Time of utterance. So when you say now, when you say the word now, right? Now is when you say that, right? Now refers to when you say it, right? When you say that utterance. So it's the time of utterance. And other things are defined in relation to that time, right? For example, the word then, the word tomorrow, and so on, right? And the place is always defined as the place where the speaker is. Location of the speaker. So the word here refers to where the speaker is, always, not other people, right? Not other people's position, location. And the social center, we haven't talked about social dictic, but also there's such a category. The social center is always the status, social status of the speaker. Okay? So that's why in Korean and in other languages, there are terms like hyung, meaning brother or sister or professor and student, right? So you use different terms, right, to talk to people, to address people. Like you call another person brother, or in Korean hyung, because you are younger than that person, right? So your status is defined in relation to the speaker, to that other person, right? That if he calls himself hyung, you are his 동생, you are his little brother, younger brother, like that. So social status, or social dexes has to do with social status, how old you are, and there are perhaps not in English so much, but in Korean and other languages, there are address terms that people have to choose depending on your status, right? And that person's, the addresser, the addressee status, like that. Okay. So let's look at this example on that page. Okay, 1 and 2. Let's look at example 1 and 2. Example 1 says, I owe you 5,000 won, right? I owe you 5,000 won. I and you here, both are deictic expressions because the reference changed depending on who said it, right? I or you and I changed. If Min-soo say it, I refers to Min-soo and you refer to the person who Min-soo talks to, like that, okay? So I and you here are deictic terms. But in number 2, look at the difference. There's a school that you book in for a week and you can learn how to hand glide, right? Hand glide is one type of gliding that you can do, right? Now, in this case, you here doesn't refer to anyone in particular, but everyone, like that. There's a school that one can book in for a week and one can learn how to hang glide, like that. So you, number 2, is non-deictic, okay? Number 2 is non-deictic because it doesn't refer to anyone in particular, and also, no matter who says it, the referent is still the same, no one in particular, okay? Number 3, should I give him this cake? The word this is deictic because it refers to that cake that is close to the speaker, right? Remember, the speaker is always the deictic center. But in number 4, the post office is one of the places where people would inquire about this and that or other things, right? Or another thing. So this and that here is non-deictic because this and that means anything, right? So this and that is not deictic, okay? Number 5, that one is nice. This is deictic, right? Because it refers to whatever it is. And notice that without the context here, which is what you have, without a context, you don't know what that refers to. So it's really a deictic term. But number 6, but I think that one of the obvious things is, but I think that that here is a complementizer, right? In a CP clause. So that here is non-deictic, okay? Number 7, there was a good crowd there, right? There here refers to a location that is far away from the speaker, so it's deictic. But number 8, there was a good crowd there, right? The first there is non-deictic because the first there is just a subject, right? That has nothing to do with place, right? But it means exist, right? Number 9, I had a letter written to her and I'll post it now maybe. Now meaning the time when the utterance was made, right? So now there is deictic, now there is deictic. But number 10 is different. If a person says, now, if after a time they found that wasn't making any impact, they called for an all-out strike. The word now there doesn't mean 지금, doesn't mean the time of utterance, but it is like a word that suggests that there is a change of topic, okay? When people say now, it doesn't always refer to the time, right? For example, now listen to me. It doesn't mean now that at that moment or something. Now is like the focus of attention term, right? Now, a change of topic term, like that. So the word now intent is non-deictic. Okay, it's non-deictic. So that's the issue of deictic, right? So deictic or deictic terms, deixis, refers to those expressions that are used in a particular context to refer to a particular referent, right? And the terms, all the deictic terms that you see can be used non-deictically, as these examples show you. 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. They can be used non-deictically, but most of the time, these terms are deictic expressions, meaning that in different contexts, they refer to different referents. And also, without knowing the context, you cannot even interpret the referent. You cannot make out what the reference might be. So for example, number 5, that one is nice. You don't even know what the word that one refers to, right? Because you have no context there, right? So on the exam, I will give you different expressions, including pronouns, including demonstratives like this and that, including words like now and so on, and then. And I will have you identify whether that term is used deictically or not, okay? So if it's used deictically, then the reference will have to change, right? Depending on the deictic center, right? If the deictic center changes, then the meaning will change. So that's the deictic use. Right? We'll take a 10-minute break here, okay, at 4, and then we'll come back and talk about speech act, right? Speech act. Speech act is also a case where the context is important in determining the meaning of a particular expression. So the first case where context influences the meaning is the case of deictic expressions, right? Now, the second case where the context may affect meaning is the case of speech acts, okay? And we have 2 different types of speech acts. So speech acts are different types of speech that you make, okay? Whether it's a question, whether it's a command, whether it's a statement like that, right? So we call these speech acts, okay? So different type of speech that you make, like whether you make a question, whether you make a command, whether you make a just a statement like that, okay? So this is the second case where the context may affect the meaning of an utterance, okay? And there are 2 types of speech acts. The first is direct, and the second type is indirect, right? So typically, there is a correlation, right? Typically, there's a matching between the form, the sentence type, the type of the speech act, and the function, okay? So for example, when you make a question, interrogative means a question. When you make a question, typically, the function of a question is to ask for information, right? To ask a question is to ask for information like that. So that's the function. Did you eat the pizza? Like, did you eat it or no? Yes or no, like that. The speaker really wants to know the answer. The speaker is trying to find out the answer. Or when you make an imperative, right? When you make an imperative, the function is to request, right? Or to command, right? To issue a command to other people. So eat the pizza, for example. So there's a matching between the form of the speech act, like imperative, and the function. Or when you just make a statement, declarative, to declare something, right? That's a speech act. And the function is just to convey some kind of information, right? You already ate the pizza, like that, right? Typically, there's a 1-to-1 correlation between the form and the function, right? But a lot of times, the form and the function do not match, okay? These examples. Stranger somewhere in Itaewon, if you were walking in Itaewon, right? This is an international district in Seoul. So the stranger asks you, do you know where the Hamilton Hotel is? So that's the landmark of Itaewon, right? This is the hotel that is right there as soon as you exit the train, the subway station, right? The train station. Now, here, do you know where the Hamilton Hotel is? Is just not a question that asks whether you know it or you don't know it. But the function of it is like asking politely, can you tell him where the hotel is? Like that, okay? So the function of this one is not just to ask a question whether you know or you don't know, but it's a polite question, right? A polite request, in other words, a polite request in the form of a question to ask you to tell where the hotel is. Yes, go straight along the street, turn left at the intersection, walk about 100 meters, you can't miss it like that. So you here can interpret that question as a request, as a polite request for information, rather than just a question. And you here just doesn't say, the person here just doesn't say, yes, I know, and then leave it at that, right? So he interprets that a lot more, right? Because that's a conventional way of asking or making a request, okay, by asking a question. Or number 2, at home, you say to your mom, I'm going out with a friend today, and your mom asks you, have you cleaned your room yet? Here, the function is not just asking a question whether you have or you have not, but perhaps it could be viewed in this situation, in this context, as a command, right? Or suggestion to clean the room, right? So it depends on the context and it depends on the relationship of the speakers here to interpret the form of the sentence as a command or just a question, right? So when a sentence type doesn't correspond with speaker's intention, we call it an indirect speech act, okay? Indirect speech act means that when the form doesn't match the function, right? In the direct speech act, you have the form matching the question, form matching the function, okay? But in the indirect speech act, the form doesn't match the function, okay? And I'll tie this up with 3 basic types of meanings, right? Locutionary, illocutionary, and also perlocutionary, 3 types of meaning. For the locutionary act, it's the literal meaning of an utterance. This is the form. This is the form type, right? A question is a question. A question asks whether you have cleaned your rooms or not, whether you know where the Hamilton Hotel is or not. So this is the literal meaning, the literal level of meaning. We call it the locutionary act, right? And the second level of meaning, we call it illocutionary. Illocutionary act is the real or intended meaning. And in direct speech acts, the real or the intended meaning matches the locutionary act, the literal meaning. But in indirect speech act, the locutionary act doesn't match the illocutionary act, okay? And the third level is the perlocutionary act, meaning the effects of the utterance on the audience. Whether intended or unintended, there would be a consequence, right? So if you look back at these examples, right? In example 2, the perlocutionary act would be that you maybe you will clean the room after your mom said that, right? So that's the perlocutionary. And in number 1, the result is that you tell him much more than he asks, right? Example is called in here. In a particular context, right? In a particular context, this is an indirect speech act, okay? The locutionary meaning, the literal level of meaning, right? It means this place is cold, like that. But possible in the right context, for example, the context where the window is open, right? Is open, and perhaps the speaker is asking the listener to close the window or to turn on the heater or to move to another room. In the right context, it could mean one of these things, okay? Whether you want to have dinner is called in here. Just like that context, that context would give out the meaning of let's move into a different room because it's related to number A, to question A, where, right? So B is called in here. has this meaning of this place is cold, and also the meaning of let's move into another room. Let's move to another room, like that. So this place is not a good place to have dinner, like that. So this is the illocutionary level. And the last level, the perlocutionary act, might be that both move to another room, the result part, okay? So we are interested in whether the locutionary part matches with the possible illocutionary act or not. So on the same handout, let's see, on the same handout that we looked at today, right? You have speech acts, right? You have speech acts, and let's see. Let's look at some examples. Number two, page 2, around the, let's see, around the end of the page, right? That's another example. A says to B, you see the end of the page, page 2. A says to B, let's go to the movies tonight. And B says, I have to study for an exam, right? So on the locutionary level, it means he has to study for the exam, right? But the intended meaning, the illocutionary level is that I decline your invitation, like that, okay? So in this case, it means I cannot go, right? I cannot go. That's the illocutionary level, okay? This issue is not difficult, okay, if you understand the context and if you understand the intended meaning, okay? So that's one example. Let's look at page 3. Let's look at page 3. Can you pass the salt to me, please? Right? Can you pass the salt to me, please? This is a question, right? The form is the question, right? But does A intend just to ask about the ability of B or not, can or cannot? No, right? He's not interested in the ability of B to pass the salt, but it's a polite request, conventional type of request, right? So B, the result is B passes the salt to A. That's the perlocutionary. But the illocutionary meaning of this one is a request, right? So pass the salt to me, like that, a request. Another one, you need to finish the homework by tonight, and May says, whatever, right? Whatever. Whatever here means anything, right? Anything could go. But the illocutionary meaning is, I don't care, like that, right? I don't care what you say to me, right? And I don't know what the perlocutionary act would be. Maybe both of these people fight with each other as a result, like that, okay? So whatever here is, I don't care, like that, the meaning, okay? And you have a lot of examples here to show you how to make suggestions in English, like why don't you take some notes? Why don't you write this up? Let's just have a look at this. So I would suggest that you take some notes and so on. So all of these, sometimes some of these, the forms do not match the intended meaning, right? Do you want to take notes, like that? Do you want to take notes? It's not just whether or not the listener wants to take notes or not, but it's perhaps a suggestion rather than a question, like that, right? So there are many ways to achieve your communicative goal, right? Perhaps a goal of making a request or the goal of making a suggestion, like that. And when you have a form that doesn't match the function, that's when you do an indirect speech act, okay? If you want to express disagreement, this is in the middle of the page there. If you want to express disagreement with the way the task is carried out, you have many ways to do that, right? Perhaps the most straightforward way is just to say, that's not how you do it. I don't like that. I don't like it that way, like that, right? And there are many, many other ways that you can think of, right? So for example, you can say, oh, that's a stupid way to do it, right? You can do that. That's a stupid way to do it. So that's just disagreement, right? Or you can say, another example, if I were you, I would do it in this way, in an X way, like that. Okay, so that could be one way. If I were you, I would do it this way, right? Or you can say, only an idiot does that. Like, only an idiot does that. So that's a way to make disagreement, right? And you are not only making a statement there, but you are criticizing that person, subtly comparing him or her with an idiot like that, a stupid person like that. So there are many ways to do it, right? To achieve the same purpose using indirect speech acts, right? And let the listener make an inference as to what it might mean, like that. Okay. In number two, there are 7 questions. Can you identify the grammatical form, whether it's the declarative meaning statement, whether it's an interrogative meaning a question, or whether it's an imperative meaning a command. And then perhaps describe the locutionary and illocutionary acts that are involved, and identify the utterance as direct or indirect speech acts. Okay? So, number 1, let's look at number 1 as an example. On the phone, is Carol home? Is Carol home? The form of it is a question, right? The form of it is a question, right? Question. And the locutionary, the literal meaning is whether Carol is home or not, right? Whether Carol is home or not. This is on the phone. But the illocutionary act, right? In most cases, the illocutionary act is, can I speak to? Or just give the phone to Carol, right? Call Carol to talk to me, like that. So that's the illocutionary. The intended meaning is, can I talk to Carol, like that. She's not only interested in whether Carol is at home or not, but let me talk to her, like that. That's the illocutionary, okay? So the locutionary is just a question asking whether Carol is home or not. But the illocutionary meaning is, I want to speak to Carol, like that. Transfer me to Carol, please, like that. So this is an indirect speech act, right? Because the form, which is a question, doesn't really match the intended meaning, or doesn't match the illocutionary, right, meaning. So I'll give you perhaps 3 minutes to do 3.2 to 3.7. And this is easy, okay? The issue of speech acts is easy. The direct and indirect is easy if you understand what's going on, the intended meaning, okay? So I'll give you 3 minutes to do number 2 to number 7, okay? And we'll go over this together. If you have questions, just raise your hands. If it's a statement, just write a declarative. If it's this question, interrogative. If it's a command, imperative, like that. And look at the intention behind each statement or each question or each command, okay? If the intention doesn't match the form, then it's an indirect speech act and the meaning is different. The illocutionary meaning is different. Okay, so let's look at number 2. This is not difficult, okay? Number 2, student to a teacher. I was wondering what the homework was for tomorrow, right? Perhaps she missed that. So the form is a not question, right? It's just a statement. So declarative is a statement, right? So the locutionary is that meaning. I was wondering what the homework was for tomorrow. So it's her state of mind, right? Meaning that that's what she's wondering. That's her question, right? That's the doubt that she has, right? But the illocutionary meaning is different, right? So the illocutionary is perhaps, tell me, please, what the homework was, like that. Tell me again what you said the homework was for tomorrow, like that. Okay? So in this case, you have an indirect speech act again, right? So rather than making a request, she's phrasing it as just a statement describing her state of mind. This is my kungkum hada, right? The wondering, like that. Okay? Number 3, a friend to a friend. I need help putting on these cufflinks. Cufflinks are like suit buttons, right? So the form is a statement, right? I need help, right? And the locutionary is he needs help. Typically, it's the literal meaning, right? So he, the speaker, needs help, and so on, right? But the illocutionary is, the intended meaning is, please help me, right? So request, please help me. But he didn't say that. He just said, I need help, but not, please help me, right? So if I'm thirsty, I can say, oh, I need a glass of water, like that. I'm thirsty. I need a glass of water, right? But typically, the most straightforward way would be, give me a glass of water, or bring me a glass of water, like that. Okay? So this is, again, an indirect speech act, because the form doesn't match, right? So the request should be carried out using a command. Give me, bring me a glass of water, like that. Or help me do that. Request should match with a command type, right? Most straightforwardly speaking. Number 3.5, the mother to a child who is eating untidily. So we have, look at the mess you have made on the table. Look at the mess you have made on the table. The form is an imperative because it's a command, right? Look at, right? So the locutionary is the literal meaning. Just look at, right? Look at. Look at the mess. But does it mean only to look? The mother wants the child only to look at the mess or not? No, right? No, the meaning is not that, right? Perhaps just stop eating like that. Stop eating like that. Stop making the mess. Or even clean that up. Clean the mess up. Could be many things, right? That is the intended meaning, right? But not just look at, for sure, right? Number 3.6. Number 3.6. Oh, I skipped one, I think. Number 3.4. Sorry. Number 3.4. Krista to student. Note that presupposition is different from entailment. Note that the presupposition is different from entailment, right? So the form is a command or imperative. The locutionary is, of course, note that. Right? The illocutionary, what might be the illocutionary? Perhaps that thing, right? To note that. Or remember that, same thing, right? Remember that, or keep in mind that. So in this case, you perhaps have a case of a direct statement. A direct speech act. Direct speech act here. 3.4, direct speech act. Because it can be argued that the locutionary meaning matches the illocutionary meaning, right? That students should take notice of, or should bear in mind, should keep in mind that presupposition is different from entailment, like that. This is 3.5, sorry. Number 3.6, 3.6. A boy who made a mistake to his mother. It's totally my fault. It's totally my fault, whatever that fault is. But who hasn't made this kind of mistake in their life? But who hasn't made this kind of mistake in their life? The form is clearly a question, right? Or an interrogative, the form. The locutionary meaning, again, literal meaning, who has never made the mistake. So, same meaning, right? But is he asking that question just to press the mother to say, oh, it's Minsu, it's Krista that hasn't made that mistake? No, right? No. The intention is not to ask for a specific name or specific names, right? But the illocutionary might be that it's understandable. The mistake is understandable. And you should forgive me like that. You should sympathize with my behavior. You should forgive me like that. You should understand me like that. Okay? That's the intended meaning, right? That everyone has done this type of mistake, so you should forgive me. Mother should forgive me like that. Okay? So that's the intended meaning. This is the indirect speech act case. Number 3.7, which is the last one, to a companion on a country walk. So they take a walk together while climbing a fence. And he says, my shirt is caught on the barbed wire. So this, oh, where is my barbed wire? See the, what people come up with in order to protect their property like that. So this is the barbed wire. And his shirt is caught on the barbed wire, for example. So in this case, the form is a statement, right? The statement. And the literal meaning is the shirt is caught on the barbed wire. The shirt got caught on the barbed wire like that. So literal meaning is what exactly the sentence says, a question says, and so on. No thinking about the literal meaning. But actually, the intended meaning is help me untangle like that, untangle the shirt, or help me get the shirt off the barbed wire like that, right? So it's a request, but in the form of a statement, right? But typically, requests are straightforwardly handled with commands or imperatives. So this is again a case of an indirect speech act like that. Okay. So today we looked at two cases where the context may affect the meaning of an utterance, right? And in each context, like the context where they take a walk, the context where a child is explaining himself, justifying himself to the mother, in these contexts, the meaning of the utterances here may not match the form of the utterances. So we call that these are indirect speech acts. And the other case that we looked at today is the case of deictic expressions, right? Where you need the context to determine the meaning, depending on what counts as the deictic center, right? Next time we'll finish. There's one, don't forget this handout, okay? So there is a case of conversational maxims or conversational implicature that we'll talk about. And that one is more complicated than the issue of indirect or direct speech. So we'll come back next time and we will get started on the history of the English language or historical linguistics next time, okay? So let's meet again next time and have a good weekend. Have a good week ahead of you and see you back here next week.